They always said I was different. They said it in careful tones when I was little. Teachers, doctors, distant relatives. Words like quirky, sensitive, slow to warm up. Words that tried to wrap discomfort in politeness. Later, when I was older, the tone changed. Too much, too cold, too intense, too quiet, too weird. I learned early on that I wasn't built for loud rooms or fast conversations. I liked patterns, lists, rhythms. I hated eye contact. I memorized license plate numbers and spoke in facts when everyone else spoke in feelings. I could sense the flicker of a lie in someone's voice, but couldn't tell when I was supposed to laugh. No one ever taught me how to belong. I was diagnosed at 13, autism spectrum disorder, level 1, high functioning. They said, like that made it easier, like it made the hallway whispers sting less, like it made the word broken feel less permanent. My parents didn't know what to do with it. My mother read a few articles. My father said I didn't look autistic. And then we never spoke about it again. But I still heard them in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. "She'll have a hard life," my mother whispered. I don't know what kind of future she'll have. They didn't say my name, but they didn't need to. I knew they were talking about me. School was noisy and exposed. The cafeteria was too loud. Group work felt like theater. I got good grades because rules made sense. But I failed the invisible curriculum, the one where you're supposed to smile at the right time, raise your hand with the correct amount of confidence, and not freeze when someone jokes at your expense. I sat alone, not because I wanted to, because I didn't know how to ask for space at the table. The others noticed. Some ignored me. Some pitied me. Some mocked me. I remember once in 8th grade, during a fire drill, someone shouted behind me, "Make sure the robot gets out too." Everyone laughed. I didn't. I just walked faster. I kept notebooks, hundreds of them. Not journals, not confessions, systems. I recorded everything what I wore each day to avoid repetition. How many times a week I made the same meal. Social scripts for greetings, conversations, exit phrases. A catalog of emotional expressions matched with possible meanings. I made my world smaller, more controllable, predictable, because the outside world wasn't built for people like me, and no one was interested in changing that. What they didn't see, what they never thought to ask, was that my mind worked in ways theirs didn't. I noticed patterns in speech, repetition in motion. I could break down problems into silent logic. I built simple machines in my garage from scraps, just to see if they'd work. I taught myself code because it followed rules. Code didn't lie. Programs didn't expect you to guess their feelings. I was 16 when I wrote my first app. It wasn't pretty. Just a clunky little tool I made for myself, an emotion tracker. I called it Echo. I built it out of frustration, after yet another meltdown that I couldn't explain to anyone, not even myself. The app was simple. I tapped through visual sliders: sound level, light level, number of people in the room, current facial temperature, stomach pressure, jaw tightness. It gave me a score. A red, yellow, green scale of overload risk. A suggestion: step outside, chew gum, press cold objects to skin. It helped. A little, enough. I kept refining it. I never planned for anyone else to see it, because I'd been told my whole life that the way I functioned was the problem. Not something to build around, just something to conceal. But that app, it didn't ask me to change. It understood me. And for the first time, something in my life felt like it fit. By the time I was in my final year of high school, I had stopped trying to blend in. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was just done. I wore noise-canceling headphones in the halls, sat at the edge of classrooms, requested assignments in writing instead of oral presentations. Some teachers cooperated, some rolled their eyes. "You'll need to learn how to cope in the real world," they said, as if I hadn't been coping my whole life, as if waking up every morning and walking into a building that felt like sensory fire wasn't proof that I was already surviving the realest part of the world. I still had no friends. I had classmates, seat neighbors, occasional project partners, but no one I shared silence with. And that was the truest sign of friendship for me, the ability to sit beside someone without performing. So instead, I spent my lunch in the library, not reading, coding. I brought my laptop and a thermos of tea and opened the latest version of Echo, my little app, my private machine of self-understanding. It has grown since I first built it. I had added a patterns tab. It tracked meltdowns, panic episodes, shutdowns. It offered suggestions based on trends. Try lowering caffeine, decrease social load on Thursdays, red flag sequence building, consider break. Echo became a second brain, one that understood what the first couldn't always process fast enough. It didn't ask me why I was anxious. It helped me track why, and that felt like power. One day, the school counselor stopped me in the hallway. She was the only adult in the building who didn't speak to me like I was glass. She handed me a flyer for a local STEM competition, Student Innovation Challenge. It said, a regional contest for high schoolers with tech ideas. You should apply, she said. You think in straight lines. That's a gift. That was the first time anyone had called the way I think a gift, so I applied. I submitted an Echo, cleaned it up, redesigned the interface, added an optional share data with support system feature. If enabled, it could send gentle alerts to a caregiver or teacher. Overstimulation likely consider check-in. The submission portal asked for a tagline. I typed, designed for people who feel everything too much and are told to hide it. I didn't expect to win, but I did. Not first place, not the big check or the TV cameras, but third, enough to be invited to present my app at the regional showcase. Enough to see my name printed on a banner. Enough to hear a judge say, this could actually help people. People, not just me. That was the moment something shifted. Because until then, Echo was a survival tool. But maybe it was something more. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about every time someone laughed at the way I spoke. Every time a teacher called me too literal. Every time a stranger told me I didn't look autistic, like that was supposed to be a compliment. And I realized I had spent years trying to shrink. But maybe my difference wasn't a defect. Maybe it was a direction. I didn't apply to the colleges my parents wanted. They had other plans for me, something safe, structured, normal. But I applied to a state university with a human-computer interaction program. It wasn't Ivy League. It wasn't fancy. But it had a neurodiversity lab. It had students who built things for real people, not just for prizes. I got in. My parents didn't celebrate. My mother sighed. I just don't want you to be disappointed. As if I hadn't been carrying disappointment since childhood, like a second spine. Before I moved out, I cleaned out my closet. I found old notebooks, pages filled with careful graphs, meltdown logs, emotional response codes. I flipped through them like artifacts from a past life. But they weren't just records of struggle. They were proof of adaptation, of a girl who had been handed a world that didn't fit and who quietly began building her own. At the bottom of the stack, I found a note I had written to myself when I was 15. A single line, scrawled in small handwriting, if I ever matter. I want it to be because I made it easier for someone like me to breathe. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Then, I opened my laptop and began designing the next version of Echo. College felt different from the start. The campus was bigger, yes, but the space between people felt wider in a good way. No one noticed if I didn't speak. No one asked why I wore headphones in the dining hall. I wasn't the weird one anymore. I was just someone in lectures. I sat in the back row, not to hide, but to observe. I took notes obsessively color-coded, diagrammed, cross-referenced. I didn't raise my hand often, but I asked the best questions after class. Professors remembered that. One, Dr. Bell, stopped me outside a seminar and said, "Your brain works like architecture, precise, structural. You don't just see answers, you map them." It was the second time in my life someone called my way of thinking a gift. I never forgot that. By then, Echo had gone through 8 versions. I'd added customizable sliders, a language simplification tool, and a visual routine builder. Each feature came from lived experience mine and the people I quietly began to connect with. There was Mira, who was stimulated with knitting needles and couldn't find an app that didn't infantilize her. There was Jude, a trans autistic student who said Echo was the first tool that respected both his identity and his brain. There was Kay, who cried when I showed her the sensory report function. "I didn't know someone else noticed this stuff." She whispered, "I didn't know it either." Until now. I started a group chat called Soft Signal, just 10 of us at first. Neurodivergent students, no pressure, no calls, no "what's your major" nonsense, just a space to say things like, "I haven't left my dorm in 2 days and I'm not sure if it's shut down or burned out. Does anyone else script every conversation in advance?" Echo said, "I'm yellow today, so I'm taking a socks-only walk around campus." No talking. That last one became a running joke. Socks only meant I'm overstimulated. But okay, it became code. Community built from coded pain. And I realized this is what Echo had always been reaching for. Not just tracking, not just management, connection. Dr. Bell became my mentor. She encouraged me to apply for a campus research grant to expand Echo into a study. Data-backed, peer-reviewed, a real publishable thing. I hesitated, not because I didn't believe in the app, but because part of me still thought someone would say, "This isn't science. This is therapy disguised as tech." But Dr. Bell looked at me with calm certainty and said, "You're designing in a language the world has never bothered to learn. That's not a weakness. It's the future." So I applied, and I got it. With the grant, I hired 2 other neurodivergent students coding support and UX design. We didn't meet in person much. We didn't do stand-ups. We worked in silence and in sync. Our Slack channel was mostly emoji reactions, lo-fi playlists, links to niche research papers. And it worked. We weren't building for profit. We were building for us. When we launched Echo V 2.0 in beta, we opened it to 300 users, students, therapists, parents, adults newly diagnosed. We offered everything for free, asked only for feedback. What we got back wasn't just technical notes. It was letters, pages of gratitude. For the first time, I can explain what I'm feeling before I explode. This helped me keep a job. My daughter used your meltdown tracker and told me what red feels like for her. I cried. I cried too, because this was no longer about proving myself. It was about creating belonging for others, and quietly, for me. Still, the world outside hadn't changed much. I still got dismissed in meetings with external developers. I still heard the word inspirational in a way that felt condescending. I still had people talk about overcoming autism as if that was the goal. But I stopped trying to correct them. I saved my energy for building. One night, I received an email from a public school counselor across the country. She had 47 students with IEPs, not enough aides, not enough support. She found Echo through a Facebook group. She asked, "Could I use this with my class?" I told her yes, and I added a classroom toolkit section to the site the next morning. That was the moment I knew this was bigger than me, bigger than college, bigger than the label I carried like armor. I wasn't just coding an app anymore. I was translating a language we were never taught to speak aloud. I never wanted the spotlight. I had built Echo from the quiet code typed in silence, feedback read in solitude, growth measured not in fame but in usefulness. But you can't control what resonates. And you can't control how fast a spark turns into something bigger. It started with a teacher's blog, a woman named Carol in Minnesota, who wrote a post titled, "The App That Helped My Nonverbal Students Speak Without Words." It got shared, then reshared, picked up by a parenting forum, then a disability rights newsletter, then a tech columnist from a major site messaged me, "Would love to talk about your story." I nearly closed the browser out of instinct. My hands get clammy, my jaw locked. It wasn't fear of exposure. It was fear of interpretation. That they'd get it wrong. That they'd make me a hero. Or worse, a tragic genius. That they'd twist my life into a headline I didn't recognize. But I took the call. Because I remembered the girl I used to be. The one who stood in the school hallway, eyes down, headphones on, stomach clenched. The one who built her world out of patterns because no one offered her permission to exist freely. If even one person like her read the article and felt less alone, it would be worth it. The piece ran the next week. It was called "Built for Silence: How One Autistic Student Coded Her Way Toward Connection." I didn't love the title, but I loved the result. Emails flooded in from parents, teachers, adults who had been diagnosed late in life, from neurotypical allies. The skeptics turned soft. One message simply said, "I didn't know there was a place for minds like mine. Until now." A month later, I was invited to speak at a local education conference. Not a TED Talk, just a small panel. I almost said no, but Dr. Bell encouraged me. "You don't have to be a performer," she said. "You just have to tell the truth." So I went. I wore a black shirt with no tags, noise-canceling earbuds around my neck, and the softest shoes I owned. I didn't memorize a speech. I brought cue cards and allowed myself to read them. I told them about Echo. I told them about me. I told them how, for most of my life, I thought silence was a flaw, but that now I saw it as a form of listening the world had forgotten how to do. When I finished, there was quiet, then applause. Then someone stood up and said, "You just gave my daughter a voice." I had to turn away for a moment to collect myself, not from nerves, from recognition, because that's what I had been looking for all along. Not paying attention, not approval, just someone to say, "I see what you're building. I see why it matters." Of course, not everyone celebrated. The more people noticed Echo, the more critics appeared. "This is just a glorified mood tracker. Why should we trust someone with no formal psych credentials? Is this just another feel-good story about autism?" One commentator tweeted, "Stop romanticizing dysfunction." Another said, "She's clearly high-functioning. This isn't the reality for most autistic people." As if I didn't know the spectrum was wide. As if I hadn't lived the parts that didn't make headlines: the meltdowns, the days of nonverbal shutdown, the panic in fluorescent grocery stores. I didn't reply. Not because I was fragile, because I had work to do. One night, I rewatched an old video of myself age 9, flapping my hands in a corner at a birthday party, overwhelmed by balloons and noise. Back then, someone had laughed. Now, watching from a decade of distance, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt fierce protectiveness. That girl deserved more than survival. She deserved tools, the language, space, that she deserved Echo. And now, she has it. I added a new section to the app, Voices. It allowed users to submit their own sensory logs, emotional patterns, routines that worked. With permission, we created a living, breathing archive, a digital neurodivergent commons. Each entry was anonymous, but every one of them sang the same thing: "Here's how I live. You're not alone in how you live too." Sometimes, I still struggle. I still lost words on high-stress days, still hated small talk, still needed 3 hours of silence after a single public event. But now, I had tools. I had people. I had a language of signals and sliders and circles of color. And more than anything, I had proof. Proof that difference is not disorder, that quiet does not mean lacking, that the world needs not just louder voices, but deeper ones. The email came on a Thursday, subject line acquisition interest, let's talk. A major tech company well known, well funded, famous for scaling things had seen the latest press about Echo. They wanted to meet, not to partner, not to sponsor, to buy. It wasn't the first offer, but it was the biggest. 7 figures. Full takeover. They said they could take it to the next level. They said I could stay on as an advisor. They said the app had potential for mainstream wellness. I closed my laptop and sat in silence for an hour. The hum of the diffuser filled the room. The sunlight spilled across the shelves. My notebooks sat in a neat stack, the earliest one still stained with oil and anxiety. And I remembered why I started this. Not to scale, not to exit, not to fit Echo into their language, but to protect mine. Later that evening, I called Dr. Bell. I didn't explain the numbers. I just asked, if the world wants to own your story, what do you do? She paused, then said, you ask if the story survives after they take your name off it. I knew my answer. I turned down the offer, politely, firmly, no explanation. I didn't owe them one, because Echo wasn't built to be sold. It was built to be shared. That weekend, I visited home. It had been over a year since I last saw my parents. They still lived in the same house, the one with the hallway I used to tiptoe through, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of being the wrong thing. They had followed my story from a distance. My mother occasionally sent links to articles she had clipped. No commentary, just subject lines like saw this or look familiar. My father hadn't said much at all. But when I stepped into the kitchen, there was a jar of lavender balm on the counter. My balm. From the very first batch. My mother pointed at it. Said, I use this before bed. Help me sleep. I nodded. It was the closest thing to I'm proud of you I had ever heard. And strangely, it was enough. Later, while helping with dishes, my father said, you know, I used to think you were just stubborn, difficult. He paused, ran a dishcloth through a glass, and kept his eyes down. But I see now you were just trying to speak a language we never learned. There was a crack in his voice when he said it. And something else I'd never heard of him before. Regret. I didn't respond right away, because words have weight when you've been misunderstood for a lifetime, and I didn't want to let bitterness write the ending. So I said, I wasn't trying to rebel. I was trying to breathe. He nodded. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but the silence between us felt different, softer, and that was enough. The next version of Echo launched 6 months later. It was the most inclusive version, yet multiple language options, adaptive visual scales, offline mode, customizable sensory environments, community boards moderated by users themselves. We didn't use corporate funding. We didn't launch with fanfare. We just opened the door. And people stepped through. I began receiving stories. A grandmother in Brazil using Echo to understand her nonverbal grandson. A refugee center in Berlin using it to support children with trauma-based shutdowns. A prison program in California integrating it into mental health counseling. Echo had become what I had once needed most. A translator between worlds. Not just for autistic people, but for anyone who's ever struggled to say, this is how I feel. Please meet me there. At a conference in Chicago, someone asked me on stage, what does success mean to you now? I thought about it. Then said, success is when someone uses my app and realizes they're not broken. They're wired for something the world hasn't fully understood yet. The audience clapped. but I wasn't performing for them. I was speaking to the girl I used to be. Sometimes, I still walk the hallways of old schools in my dreams. Same lockers, same lights, same weight in my chest. But now, I'm not hiding. I'm handing out tools, and the silence that used to suffocate me now follows me like peace. I still don't like mirrors, not because I dislike how I look, but because for most of my life, I searched for answers in a reflection that never spoke back. Now, I search for data, in movement, in stillness. I search in the way people write to me now, not just with words, but with relief. Relief that someone, somewhere, finally put shape to their silent chaos. Echo is used in over 40 countries now. It's translated into 12 languages. We built an anonymous peer log called Signal Field, where users can leave short notes. Today I needed 3 hours in the dark, and it was not a failure. I was irritated in public and didn't apologize. My meltdown wasn't the end. It was the middle of recalibration. My child said yellow, and I knew exactly what they meant. It's the most beautiful place on the internet I've ever seen. Not polished, not loud, just real. At the last Echo Community Summit, a quiet, low-sensory event we hosted in a gardened warehouse, someone asked me if I had any advice for other girls like you. I stood there, holding a microphone I didn't want, blinking under the soft white lights, and I thought about all the things I could say. Don't give up, trust your mind. Silence can be strength. But what I said instead was this: you don't need to explain your brain to be worthy of space, because that's what I had needed to hear. Not a plan, not a label, just permission. Sometimes I imagine going back in time, sitting beside my younger self on that bench outside the cafeteria where I used to eat alone, tracing circles on the lid of my lunchbox so I didn't have to look at anyone. I'd sit quietly, not saying much. Then I'd slide over a phone, open Echo, tap a few sliders. Let her see the green glow. Let her feel the validation of something, anything responding to her unspoken state. And I'd tell her, if she could listen one day, you'll build a world that understands you better than this one ever tried to. I no longer dream of being normal. I don't chase fluency in neurotypical performance. I don't flinch when people say I'm intense. I don't shrink from the word autistic. It's not a scar, it's a signal. My parents come around more now. They don't always know what to say, but they try. My mom keeps articles about Echo in a folder. My dad once referred to my app as a quiet revolution, which I think was his version of poetry. They ask questions now, and more importantly, they listen to the answers. Claire, my cousin, once the golden child of the family, recently reached out to say her son had been diagnosed. She didn't ask for advice. She just said, "I see what you did now, and I'm sorry I didn't see it earlier." I told her it was okay, because we all learn in our own time. I still live alone. My walls are painted in soft colors. My books are arranged by topic, not author. I keep textured stones on my desk. I wear weighted socks in the evenings. And I still eat the same breakfast every morning: toast, banana, green tea. Routine is not rigid. It's a relief. And this life, this strange, quiet, fully mine life, is not a compromise. It is a choice. People still ask if I'll ever expand, make Echo more mainstream. I always smile and say Echo is already as big as it needs to be. The point was never to conquer. The point was to connect. And when they don't get it, I don't try to explain. Because I no longer build for the ones who laughed. I build for the ones who are listening.